Hey everyone, the 2024 FIDE World Chess Championship just started in Singapore, and for the next days until December the 13th, current world champion Ding Liren will defend his title against Indian prodigy Gukesh. And I cannot think of a more exciting start. Ding has been struggling in the past month, so Gukesh is the clear favorite to win the tournament. But in the first game, Ding completely outplayed Gukesh, playing a nearly flawless game. So let's analyze this exciting game. Gukesh started with e4, and after e6, we already have a mild surprise because Ding normally goes for e5 after e4, and after d4 and d5 we have the French defense. Here Gukesh goes for knight to c3, and Ding went knight to f6, bishop to b4 is another common line, knight to f6, and after e5, knight f to d7, f4 is fairly standard. White gets a strong center, black tries to counter-attack the center, and in this position Gukesh played a somewhat strange move by going knight c to e2, and this is something that we'll see throughout the game and pretty much throughout the rest of the match. The preparation for this match is very deep, and very often we're gonna get moves that will avoid main lines to either fight against the opponent's preparation, or there may also be some strange looking moves suggested by the engines. So knight c to e2, even though it looks strange because it's a retreating move, it has the main idea of taking on d4 with the knight, and white also wants to go c3. So this is a common idea played in the French. It was played a bit early, but this is a very common idea in this line. And here Ding continued with knight to c6. Black will try to put pressure on white's center. Taking on d4 is an option, but in any case, normally both sides delay this idea. Here after taking on d4, this will improve the knight on e2. Black can play this later, and similarly white will not rush taking on c5, because this will improve black's pieces. So after knight to c6, c3, and now it's black's turn to play a strange move. Here black went a5. In this position black has many options. The queen normally goes to b6 to increase the pressure on the center, bishop to e7, developing the bishop and getting ready to castle is also an idea that will be played later in the game. But the move a5, even though it looks a bit early, is also a very common idea by black. Very often in this line in the French, black gets play on the queen side and white will get play on the king side. So here Gukesh went knight to f3, which is very logical. White could have prevented black's idea by going a4, but white simply wanted to gain some time by developing. But a4 is possible, but the main idea is that after black plays something like queen to b6 and knight to f3, let's say that black goes bishop to e7, if white ever moves the knight on e2, for example knight to g3, which is not necessarily a strong move, just want to show you the main idea. Now black could take on d4, and if white takes with the c-pawn, now the b4 square has become weakened, so at least black is gaining something if white goes a4. So here Gukesh went knight to f3, and after a4, Gukesh now continued developing by going bishop to e3. White has an idea of going a3, fixing the pawn a4, but this would also weaken the b3 square, so we might think of ideas like knight to a5 and knight to b3 later on in the game. So Gukesh went bishop to e3, and after bishop to e7, these positions are very rich. White has many options. Gukesh went for g4, which is quite ambitious. He could have tried going knight to g3 and then planning to develop the bishop and castle, but g4 is a common idea, trying to gain space on the king side. And now Ding went queen to a5, so we see another idea of this pawn push, that the queen can develop to a5 instead of b6. That's quite an interesting idea. Here Gukesh went bishop to g2, and now Ding went a3, planning to take on b2, that's why Gukesh went b3. And after c takes d4, here Gukesh played an interesting intermediate move. He went b4. First of all, he cannot take with the knight on e2, which is one of the main ideas of going knight to e2, because this would simply lose a pawn on c3. Taking with the knight on f3 was an option, but b3 is probably a bit more ambitious. Attacking the queen, and after queen to c7, now Gukesh took on d4 with the knight on e2. So white's pieces on the center look very nice, but after b4, now the c4 square has become weakened. So the position is fairly balanced, and Ding went knight to b6, trying to occupy the square. And by the way, if you want to know how Ding became the world champion, I have a video about it that you might want to check in the description. So here Gukesh decided to castle, and now Ding went knight to c4. In these positions, castling is an option, but if you play the French, you probably know that the king is sometimes safer on e8 than on g8. So here in this position, white could first go king to h1, improving the king, and now white is sooner or later ready to push the pawns on the king side. This is probably the style of position that Gukesh wanted to have. So Ding went knight to c4, attacking the bishop, and after bishop to f2, bishop to d7, queen to e2. Now he took on d4. The idea is to get access to the c file and put pressure on c3, as we'll see. Knight takes. Here again, black doesn't want to rush and castle. Although it is true that this rook on h8 is passive, the other pieces are going to become very active. Here he played the very nice knight to b2 with the idea to put pressure on c3. And after queen to e3, rook to c8, increasing the pressure on c3. Now it's Ding who is attacking pawns, which is one of the most important ideas in the middle game. And after rook a to c1, queen to c4, playing on white's camp. This is very instructive, putting pressure on white's pawns. And in this position, Gukesh, who probably was under a lot of pressure, he went f5, which as we'll see has some drawbacks. In this position, black is doing perfectly fine, but it was probably better for white to play some solid moves like rook f2 e1. This might even have an idea of going bishop to f1, attacking the queen. And the main point is that taking this pawn is actually not a good idea, because white could either get it back easily after rook to a1, or even go bishop to f1, trying to trap the queen on a2. But after being under pressure, it makes sense to try to get active. That's why he went f5, which is also pretty much the main idea for white in the position. But now Ding went queen to d3, trying to trade queens. If white trades queens, then after knight takes, there's just a lot of pressure on white's position. This position is really bad for white. So white avoided the trade of queens, which is correct, but queen to f4 was a lot better than what was played in the game. Queen to e1, as I very often tell my students, retreating moves are very often bad, and this case was no exception, because after queen to e1, this will allow black to go bishop to g5. So Ding is just putting pressure after every move. And after rook to c2, now Ding went rook to c4. Now, even though black's position is great, black still has to be a bit careful. The move bishop to a4 might look very tempting, just increasing the pressure, but this would leave the pawn e6 undefended. Gukesh was probably counting on this idea. Here white can take on e6, and after f takes and knight takes, even sacrifice the rook on c2. For example, after bishop takes, white can take on g7 with the knight, and this position is actually quite good for white because the king on e8 is now very exposed. For example, after king to d8, white can go e6 with ideas of going e7, also bring the queen to e5 and bishop to b6. So this is definitely not the way to go for black. So rook to c4 is another way to put pressure, a better way to put pressure, because now there's an idea to go rook takes c4 and then capture the rook on c2. Here Gukesh went h4, attacking the bishop, and after bishop to f4, white's position is just falling apart. White went queen to b1 to defend the rook. There's the idea to take on d4. So queen to b1 defends the rook on c2. But now Ding simply collects a pawn on c3, and after rook takes and queen takes, Gukesh took on e6, and Ding took back with the e-pawn. It was probably simpler to take with the bishop. This would give more squares to the king on e8. And after f takes and knight to e2, Gukesh is giving another pawn, but at least he's going to get the two bishops. That might become quite strong if the position opens up. So here Gukesh had a last chance to hold the game, which I'm actually quite surprised that he didn't go for, because it was a fairly direct idea. Here he went queen to c2 and he lost the game quite quickly, but the interesting idea was to go bishop to c5. Even though white gives another pawn, now it's going to be hard for white to castle with the bishop on c5. So even though black has a large material advantage, it might become a bit hard to convert this position. But instead of going bishop to c5, Gukesh went queen to c2. And before I continue with the rest of the game, if you want to seriously improve at chess, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that, so feel free to check the link in the description. So here after queen to c2, here Ding simply went queen to c4, avoiding any invasion on the c-file. White doesn't want to trade queens, being 2 pawns down, so he went queen to d2. Now black finally castled, and after bishop to d4, knight to d3, black improves the knight, also attacks the bishop. And after queen to e3, here Ding found a very forcing way to simplify the position. After rook takes and bishop takes, the knight on d3 is pinned, but e5 is very strong, counter-attacking. And after bishop takes, queen takes, bishop to g2. Here taking on e5 was possible, but this would simply activate white's pieces. There would be pressure on d5, so bishop to f5 is a lot stronger, planning to go bishop to e4. And after bishop to g3 and bishop to e4, king to h2, so the position is completely winning for black, but Ding still has to be careful about some tricks. Here he played a very strong h6, taking on g2 would ruin everything because after queen to e8 we get a checkmate. That's why he gets some error for the king after h6, and after bishop to h3, queen to d1, bishop to d6, Ding simply collected this very important pawn a2, because after king to g3 and queen takes, now this pawn is ready to advance. But here Gukesh had one last trick, he went for bishop to e6, and after king to h8, Gukesh resigned, and Ding won the first game of the match. So just want to mention that here, king to h7 would allow white to save the game, because here after queen takes e4, we give a check, and after we take, white would win a piece. But the main point of going to h8 and not to h7 is that after white goes for this trick of taking e4, instead of taking e4, black has the intermediate move, queen to f2, giving a check, and then black will simply collect the queen. So this was an amazing win, also very unexpected, so the match is going to get very exciting. I'm pretty sure that Gukesh will fight back, he's a great player, and we'll have many exciting games ahead. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.